Hello, everybody. Welcome. Hello. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're super excited to hear from two amazing people who have been doing incredible work in the Jewish community. I am Molly Tolsky. I am the editor of Kveller, which is a thriving online community for Jewish women and parents. Kveller is part of 70 Faces Media, the largest and most diverse Jewish media organization in North America. We are very proud to put on tonight's event in partnership with the UJA Federation of New York. Tonight, we are going to be hearing from two incredible mental health professionals who have really shifted their work entirely since the events of October 7th to focus on the needs of the Jewish community. And that has been through their work on the Jewish Community Mental Health Initiative, or JCMHI. I feel like I'm going to say that a lot and trying to get used to saying it quickly. Dr. Tara Liberman and Dr. Sasha Soykin, just so you know, kind of run of show before I introduce them. They're going to be speaking for about 20-25 minutes about their initiative and what they've learned. And then after that, I'll be moderating a brief Q&A. And I would love to include as many questions from the audience as possible. So as you think of questions, as they're talking, as things come up, please feel free to drop questions into the chat box in the Zoom. And I will, be reading through those and doing my best to get as many questions answered as possible. So let me introduce our two speakers tonight. Dr. Tara Liberman is a licensed psychologist in private practice in New York City, specializing in individual psychotherapy for adults, children, and families. Within 3 weeks of October 7th, 2023, Dr. Liberman led the initiative to mobilize and train mental health clinicians to provide free virtual support for the Jewish community. And as such, she is the founder and director of the Jewish Community Mental Health Initiative. And she is joined by Dr. Sasha Soykin, a licensed clinical psychologist specializing in trauma, grief, and health psychology. On top of her work in private practice, she also addresses societal issues, notably projects supporting those affected by anti-Semitism and the war in Ukraine. And she is one of the founding members of the Jewish Community Mental Health Initiative. So I am going to pass it off to them for their talk, and then we'll reconvene and chat a little bit more after that.
Thank you. Thank you, Molly. So welcome, everyone. Sasha and I are so glad to be here tonight to talk about our Jewish community, our mental health, and our resilience as a community. Next slide, Sasha. So first, let's start off briefly about who we are. As Molly mentioned, we are a community of around 90 volunteer psychologists, clinicians, educators, and researchers. And we formed the Jewish Community Mental Health Initiative in response to the rise in anti-Semitism after 10/7, the grief we were experiencing as a community, and also the isolation the community was experiencing. The initiative was formalized in June 2024 when we made a partnership with the American Psychological Foundation. And we are underneath their umbrella. We're very lucky to be part of National Organized Psychology. And that is how we became the Jewish Community Mental Health Initiative. We have facilitated hundreds of free virtual support groups for Jews worldwide. And we often think of ourselves as on the front lines of Jewish mental health. Anyone who identifies as Jewish and is 18 years or older is welcome to any of our public and free virtual support groups. Each group has no more than 10 participants and 2 trained clinicians. There right now are 25 groups open to our public, and we also provide support to private organizations, and that might look like something time limited, like 3 sessions with a Jewish employee resource group, or it may look like a more long-term support. We've done up to a year for private organizations, weekly support groups. We provide our own evidence-informed trainings for our clinicians, and we also provide a weekly process group for our clinicians that serves as support and consultation for the work that we are doing every week. And that is because we are members of the Jewish community as well, and we know that in order to continue to do this work well, we need support ourselves. So the other important piece of JCMHI is that we conduct research on the impact of anti-Semitism on the mental health of our Jewish community. We actually have 2 studies that are about to launch. And those are, one, looking at the impact of anti-Semitism on young adults and how they're coping. We have from, these support groups we've been running for a year and a half now, we have found that young adults in particular are coping in new ways, such as connecting more to spirituality and religion or cultural aspects of their Jewish identity. So we're going to look at that more closely and gain an understanding of what may be serving our young adults well, what may be mediating the impact of anti-Semitism on mental health. And we're also doing a study on traumatic invalidation, and I will get into that more a little bit later. So this initiative started after 10/7, as I mentioned, but it was informal at first. I think we can change. So, oh, here we are. That's right. Thanks, Sasha. We started with an informal task force where we did a tremendous amount of outreach to psychologists across the country and actually in other countries as well. We do have some psychologists from outside the country, from Israel, from Canada, for example. And we also have participants in our support groups that come in from outside the country as well, although we're mostly serving the US. We began this initiative with what we had learned from other responses that psychologists had come to support during COVID, during the Maui wildfires or the Surfside building collapse. And we began this initiative with serving the campus community where we saw the initial rise and significant rise of anti-Semitism. We collaborated with many Jewish organizations. We looked to them to understand their needs. Often the Jewish organizations surveyed internally their communities and gave us feedback. And we also conducted many focus groups to understand the various communities that were impacted. We expanded quickly from the campus community into the wider Jewish community after we continually heard that there were more and more needs. And I remember one day getting a call from someone who said, look, I see you're serving and supporting all these young people, but we retired folks need support too. So we quickly put into place a support group for retirees, which is still very active today. And we serve anyone from 18 years all the way through the age span. So we, as I mentioned, train our own clinicians. We initially did a basic psychological first aid training, which we will get into later, but we quickly tailored it to the needs of the Jewish community and then worked in consultation with experts from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, as well as Natal Global Trauma and Resiliency Center from Israel. We continue to work with these individuals and meet regularly with Natal as Israeli clinicians to continue to develop our trainings with our volunteer staff. And we very soon will be sharing out our JCMHI manual. Okay, Sasha, I'm turning it over to you.
So there's so much that Tara and I could talk about here, and we're going to try to just kind of give an overview of some of the stuff we've noticed, we've observed. We're to kind of hopefully leave space for the Q&A portion. So I apologize if it's a bit cursory in terms of what we'll cover, but this slide is really talking about what we observed through our support groups initially after 10/7. And so many feelings came up for everyone who was coming in and sharing with us. And I'm sure that I'm preaching to the choir when I say that loneliness and isolation were really, really big experiences that people were reporting, right? So many felt disconnected from prior relationships, prior groups, especially queer Jews were really struggling with support and kind of disruption in their communities. There's also a disruption of routines where people felt like, I can't go to my coffee shop because there's, you know, stickers there that make me feel not safe, or so forth. Exclusion from spaces, feelings of disbelief, confusion, anxiety, sadness, loss, grief. Grief was a really, really big experience that so many felt after 10/7, as well as helplessness, hopelessness, wanting to be a part of the community and to give back and maybe not knowing how. And many also spoke about reconnecting with their Jewish identity in ways that maybe they had never connected with it before, or rediscovering their Jewish faith, Jewish culture, Jewish traditions. Some other things that we noticed were people really struggling to trust both others in the community and also to trust themselves, kind of feeling even gaslit of like, is this just me? Am I, you know, kind of the only one reacting to this? And our groups really helped to show everyone that, no, this is not just you. And we are very much all in this together. And then finally, there's a fear of seeking help because so many, and this was really clear on college campuses, so many Jewish individuals who sought mental health treatment really did not feel safe with many therapists, especially non-Jewish therapists. And so they felt kind of at an extra loss of where to go for support. And so something we noticed is there's really this continuation of, you know, from stress to PTSD in terms of trauma, it's a spectrum. And I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but the bottom line is we can pretty much say that almost everyone after October 7th experienced very significant stress at the very least, right? This normal physiological, psychological response to something horrific. And so the body reacts to that. That's where we have that fight or flight response that you may have heard of. But then for many, it went from stress to this traumatic stress, where because of the type of incident, because it was so traumatic in nature, and then because it followed this rise in anti-Semitism, the protests that we saw, that the physical symptoms for some and the psychological symptoms for some continued on. And so for some people, it even maybe developed into kind of more significant traumatic stress or PTSD with intrusive thoughts, avoidance, negative changes in mood, and so forth. So something we want to just quickly touch upon is intergenerational trauma, which refers to the transmission of trauma and its effects from one generation to the next. So even generations that did not directly experience a traumatic event. And we know that this form of trauma is often seen, you know, in families of Holocaust survivors. I'm sure many have heard about this within Jewish communities. It's been shown with Mizrahi Jewish communities affected by events, with indigenous communities, and so forth. And what happens here is that the pain of the previous generation, it does not vanish. It imprints itself on the descendants, on many of us, in ways that are both seen and unseen. And it lives in stories, it lives in our behaviors, it lives in our emotional patterns, and oftentimes moments of crises and moments of new trauma will reawaken a lot of this. And so 10/7 was that moment for many people, as was, again, the rise in anti-Semitism afterwards. So for a lot of people, a lot of trauma-related symptoms started to come up. And we think that this is partly why. And intergenerational trauma does manifest typically there's 3 different pathways in which it can manifest. It comes through the direct transmission, where kids absorb their parents' trauma through emotional modeling. There's indirect transmission, where the unresolved trauma might create overprotection or emotional distancing. And then there's the historical memory, and that's kind of the layers of inherited memory that may lie dormant or may not lie dormant, memories that are not entirely our own, but that do shape us.
Thank you, Sasha. So now I'm going to speak a little bit about something else we began to observe after 10/7, which was people's feelings and experiences often were not understood or validated by the community. And that led to many of the feelings that and experiences that Sasha just described. And, what we were hearing in groups was that people were saying, I feel like the world is turned upside down. I feel like I don't know what's real anymore. I feel like I'm going crazy. I feel helpless. All of these experiences were being reported in our groups. And, shortly after, not shortly after, but probably after a few months of running support groups, I heard a presentation on traumatic invalidation by Mary Barr Halpern. And I thought to myself, this is exactly what we're seeing in our support groups. This is what we're seeing in Jewish community. So traumatic invalidation is, defined as the extreme denial of experiences. TI is studied in both individuals and marginalized communities, and it's mostly been studied in the LGBTQ plus community. And now we are very, very glad to say, not that we're glad that our community is experiencing this, but JCMHI is now going to launch a study on looking at experiences of traumatic invalidation and symptoms in our own Jewish community. And the reason why we are looking forward to this study is because we know that our community needs data. There's a dearth of data for the Jewish community in academic literature. So it's extremely important that we conduct research, and that will allow for us to make more meaningful change and create support for our community. So TI is described as, your experience being ignored. Others are not paying attention or treating your experience like it's not important. Emotional neglect, not receiving the support or care that you need for your suffering, feeling that others are indifferent to your suffering, criticizing you, which can take the form of direct insults or put downs or name calling, or being told that you're playing the victim role or that your feelings are wrong, being blamed for things like being held responsible for things that are not your fault. Being misinterpreted, so your intentions or your thoughts or experiences are being misread and misunderstood by others, and they're putting a negative spin on it, maybe. Denying your reality, so telling you that your belief or your experience is not real, it's not happening, that never happened, those facts did not happen. Being excluded from spaces, so not being allowed to be part of communities that you were once in, or those communities once felt like home for you. Unequal treatment, being told that you're less than, or being others acting towards you like you are less than, different, or bad, and being discriminated based on your identity. Again, not being allowed into certain spaces. So these experiences are what can lead to the feelings that we've heard from Sasha earlier, as well as changes in our worldviews and starting to maybe experience the world as not a good place. Go ahead, Sasha.
And something else that we started to really see so clearly and that people would talk about is this idea of collective grief, or a shared emotional response to a significant tragedy, disaster, right? So it really touches the entire community. And for us, it was really a shared traumatic reality. We really saw this within our support groups, where facilitators were part of the same community and felt the same grief and loss and anger and sadness around everything, and isolation that the participants felt. And so it was really kind of coming together in this way. Something that we really focus on is allowing the space for all participants to mourn and to be able to grieve. And then we also provide weekly support to our facilitators, so they also have a place to do that. So this is a very busy slide, and the point of it is that there's a lot of reactions to experiencing anti-Semitism and traumatic invalidation. And you can just see it in a glimpse of there are emotional, psychological, cognitive, behavioral, and physical responses when we are going through this. And when we are going through it without a break, without a pause, this really starts to add up. And so again, for sake of time, I won't go into all of these, but anywhere from the sadness to withdrawal to headaches, all sorts of things are very common.
So we have been, as I mentioned, I believe earlier, working with the community across the country and internationally at times as well. And our community is very small, but it's also very diverse. So what we originally recognized was there was a need for certain affinity groups, and we have many. For example, we have an LGBTQ plus group that runs every week, and we also have a monthly group for the queer community. One thing that we observed and continue to observe is the impact of Jews with marginalized intersectional identities in addition to Jewish identity. And there was a recent study by Eshel and a wider bridge that found, sadly, 82% of LGBTQ plus Jews experienced harassment or expulsion from queer spaces, and 41% left those spaces because of this. So these are very daunting statistics, but they're probably not surprising. And so we have affinity groups, and the LGBTQ plus groups are ones that are extremely popular and often fill before any other group. And our second most popular group is our Jewish adults group, which is actually the most inclusive group. All you need to do is be 18 and identify as Jewish in some way. And it brings Jews together from all backgrounds. What we found was right after 10/7, the Jewish community felt united, which is not often the case. But that shifted after months. We began to notice that there was more discord within the Jewish community, and that, with our very diverse community, diverse in terms of ethnicity, race, age, geographic location, political spectrum, socioeconomic status, what we were seeing was people were having very different opinions and perspectives, and there was, becoming more upset, especially as the election approached. So we knew we needed to, shift and provide some support around dialogue across differences, which was not happening as much shortly after 10/7. And we actually did some additional training for our volunteer clinicians. We used the resetting the table method so that we could increase everyone's capacity to support dialogue across extreme differences. And really around the political spectrum, we have Jews who span the entire spectrum, which we're very glad to have, because we know that it's very important for us to hear each other out, to learn from each other, and to create meaning together. We know that when we are able to connect authentically and listen, we increase our capacity for empathy, and our connections are much more nourishing. So especially at a time when Jews were experiencing, lots of loss in connection, we wanted to make sure that we facilitated connection across differences so that people could feel a sense of closeness, even if they had differing perspectives. Let's switch, Sasha. Okay, so how do we cope during this time that is continuous traumatic stress, that we're experiencing as a Jewish community? And I'm going to try and go through this quickly. So we, as I mentioned, use the model of psychological first aid, which is really shifting the perspective of when we are having symptoms, experiences, feelings, then we do not want to pathologize a community that is going through a collective trauma. So we really want to contextualize that and put it where it belongs, which is we are responding and having these feelings because of our environment and because what we are enduring. So first and foremost, we do not pathologize our community. We provide context and explanation. We are looking to these core concepts in all of our groups, and we think about them in our daily lives as well as a way to, promote our well-being. Finding sense of calm in our group or in our daily life is extremely important. And sometimes it feels hard to find ways to do that when there's so much stress in the world. But we think together in our groups, and really the facilitators are there to support the process, but our community has demonstrated incredible capacity and strength to do all of this work. Really putting experiences into words and legitimizing feelings and experiences immediately reduces distress. Promoting a sense of safety. Again, we don't want to invalidate our community's worries or fears because they are understandable and meaningful right now, but we also want to help our community shift out of the fight, flight, freeze mode and be able to find moments and periods of feeling safe. And often people report that the support groups are one of those places. We want to restore a sense of self and community efficacy. Obviously, this rise in anti-Semitism and the trauma going on in Israel as well is impacting our community. And how do we as individuals and as a community restore our sense of strength? How do we reconnect to our capacities? And what we're seeing is also our community is developing new ones. So we are meeting the challenges and we are experiencing distress and we are growing at the same time. Fostering connection is one of the most important pieces of our work. The idea of bringing people together to heal in a group is what we are finding is extremely hopeful and meaningful to our community. And it's legitimizing their experiences. The community is able to share the grief and not hold it alone, and also problem solve together. These are community challenges and they need a collective to solve it. We do not want to be doing this individually. Maintaining hope, even when we are in these very challenging times, the capacity to create meaning together is how we can maintain a sense of hope and continue to mobilize as a community despite being in these challenging times. We've been here before, and we can accept, we work to accept the things that we cannot change and then recognize what we can do together, whether it's individually with friends, family, or in our profession or community.
Typically, a lot of what we do is really just through kind of a supportive, open dialogue within the group, but sometimes we do go into more kind of structured coping tools just to help all of us when we might feel like we're drowning or floundering a bit. And so I'm just going to very briefly introduce a couple of these. One that we really like to use is subjective units of distress, or SUDS, if anyone's heard of that. It's a really great way to just kind of quickly assess where you're at from 0 to 10, how anxious, distressed, scared, angry, whatever emotion, are you? And then within that, once you can assess that, like, okay, now what do you do to take care of yourself? So it's kind of like just a quick check-in with where you're at. Another similar check-in like that is just if you're what's called the window of tolerance. Are you in kind of your optimal zone? This is where we feel regulated, open, able to kind of process what's coming at us. Or are we in the hyper aroused fight or flight zone when stress is pushing us over the edge? Or are we in the hypo-arousal freeze response zone when we feel numb and disconnected and withdrawn? So if we can use SUDS and or window of tolerance, we can kind of see where we're at and then what we need from that place. And some of the things that we can do if we are in that hyper-arousal zone, or our SUDS are too high, or anxiety is kind of too high, is various types of grounding exercises. These can be as simple as taking a few deep belly breaths. A really common exercise right now is called box breathing, which is talked about all over social media and the media. So many of you may have heard this, but it's just the idea of thinking of your breath cycle in a box. You inhale for 4 counts, then you hold it for 4 counts, then you exhale for 4 counts, and then you hold it for 4 counts, and you repeat. And it just helps slow your breath and become more mindful of your breath. There's a lot of other grounding techniques where you're just trying to self-soothe, or there's sensory grounding where you can name 5 things that you see, 4 things that you can touch around you, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste in the moment to reconnect with the current moment when we're kind of being pulled into the loop of all the negative. And then the last one I just want to quickly mention is drainers and chargers. And this is just this idea, it's kind of like if we use the metaphor of our social battery, we need to charge our social battery. Which things in our life drain us in the way that it sounds, and which charge us, replenish our energy, right? That can be conversations, that can be activities, it can be places. And so just thinking, what are you engaging in day to day? Is your work draining or charging? And if it's draining, but you have to do it anyway, how can you add more charge to your life? And really trying to balance that a bit. So very quick overview of a couple of coping tools.
Okay. Thank you, Sasha. So this is the last concept that we're going to speak about tonight. Then we're going to go to a Q&A. What we've been observing is that rather than being in what many may be familiar with called post-traumatic growth, we are seeing what we're calling continuous traumatic growth. So obviously we are still in the stress and often trauma of the current climate. And at the same time we're experiencing distress, we are watching community grow and reconnect to strengths and develop new strengths. And it's a concept that is different from bouncing back. It's really something that when we are able to process our feelings and distress and recognize that there are certain things we don't have control over, we also can recognize that this is a time where we can make meaning and we do have control over creating something new in many cases. So flexibility, curiosity, and self-compassion are extremely important in these times. And here are some areas of continuous traumatic growth that we're recognizing. People are feeling at times after being in these stressful or challenging moments that they're gaining strength and capacity to use their voices or to speak up or advocate for their children. We're seeing people whose relationships may be shifting. Obviously, we know there was a lot of loss and disconnection, and now we're seeing new relationships. For example, in our groups, we're seeing participants who are creating new and intimate relationships outside of the groups. They may have met someone within the group, but they are now connecting outside and speaking about these connections as feeling like family. We're discovering new possibilities. People are, they're maybe leaving careers and trying new ones that are more connected to what they're passionate about. They may be doing something that that resonates more with them in this moment, and they are recognizing strengths that they may not have realized they have. Personally, this project is not something I ever imagined. I hadn't really worked professionally in Jewish spaces before this time, and I really never imagined beginning an organization, but this current moment allowed me to connect and grow in a very particular way. And spirituality, we're certainly noticing many are reconnecting to Jewish identity, as I mentioned, in various ways, finding a sense of purpose and connection to religion, finding meaning in trauma, and also appreciation for life in new ways, things that maybe they were not recognizing before before 10/7. Now they're starting to recognize and experience, such as small things like gardening. I have someone who started doing pottery, knitting, these small practices are now becoming very meaningful. Go ahead, Sasha. So as I mentioned, when we are able to acknowledge and accept what's happening in our environment, we can really experience and process the impact on ourselves and our community. And then we are much more capable of making meaning and setting goals that are ones that are not too large, not the idea of going back to where we were. Often we need to be much more flexible and develop new routines that meet our needs during this time. Connecting with others is of the utmost importance. Others who are able to bear witness to your experience and validate it. And again, that doesn't mean that everyone agrees with you, but they are able to hear and see your experience. And practicing self-compassion is extremely important during this time because many things have been changed. Our routines, our connections, our daily life may look very different now from what it did before 10/7, and we need to allow ourselves that space to be flexible and be able to grow in new ways. And I think that is the end of our slides, and we are hopefully going to have time now for some Q&A.
Yes, thank you both so much. I know that was just skimming the surface of everything that you've been doing, and it's truly incredible and such a gift to our community. So thank you. As a reminder, I'm gonna, ask some questions and also hope to get questions from the audience. So anyone, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat. You were sort of just talking about this, Tara, but my first question was, I know for both of you, this has been a total shift in your professional lives, right? Like before this, you were not working exclusively or specifically within the Jewish community, and now you very much are. And I just wondered, what has that been like for you on a personal level to be working within the community that you're a part of? And do you foresee yourselves continuing to really focus on the Jewish community for the future?
Sure. Do you want me to go first, Sasha?
Sure, go ahead.
Yes. So before, I think I just mentioned before 10/7, my Jewish identity was not necessarily part of my active professional identity. And really, I had begun to do some research and work in understanding the rise in anti-Semitism, but clinically, I was not really practicing in this way until after 10/7. And it has been both an extremely meaningful experience and fulfilling, and at the same time also exhausting. And I have been, very grateful for colleagues that, this is a community mental health response that really is being addressed by a community. We are, as I mentioned, around 90 of us, and we come together, we support each other, we meet in many committees weekly, but we also have 2 clinician support groups that run weekly for everyone. So that has been a really vital part of this project.
Yeah, thank you, Tara. I think for me, so similar, my Jewish identity was not at all a part of my professional work identity before 10/7. It's very, very separate. I worked in private practice, and it just would have never crossed my mind to kind of even meld the two in this way until 10/7. And then I think I felt so just pulled to give to the community in some way after 10/7 occurred. And I met, Tara through this organization. And I feel like I have connected with so many people because of this. I am so grateful to be doing this because this is where I get my support. This is where, even though it's really tough and emotionally draining on some days, it's also like the most support I could possibly imagine in terms of being in this Jewish community. And so I'm very grateful that I've kind of made my way here sort of on accident after 10/7.
You mentioned, I'm going to try not to butcher the official term, but this is like a continual traumatic response, right? Like this is an ongoing thing. I'm curious, you started just like in the weeks after 10/7, and now we are roughly a year and a half, later. And I'm curious if you've seen a notable shift in symptoms or just the general well-being or mental health status of the people that you've been reaching.
Well, I think it depends on if people have been able to process, something that we heard for a long time, and we will still hear on occasion when people are coming into the groups, is that they really haven't felt like they've had a space to process grief. And that grief is either, the loss of what, life was before, or the loss of individuals, whether it's a lack of connections, or if it's death in family and friends. So what we're seeing is the emotional toll is sort of growing in one way, and if you haven't received support, I think that's where we're seeing more symptoms. But when people have been getting the support they need and they've been processing, especially with community, I think we're seeing a lot of strength and a lot of growth and a lot of regaining new ways of living, and that can be something that is very fulfilling.
I know you've talked a little bit about like some specific groups like queer Jews and like other marginalized groups. Have you seen, like, is there a specific subset of the Jewish community that you feel like really still needs a lot of support, whether it's an age group or a different kind of demographic, that you're really seeing the need still there?
I mean, I think there is a need in many groups. I think that certainly the queer Jews are a group that are impacted tremendously because they've lost spaces that were once home. So I think that is something, it's very obvious to us that there is great need there, because those groups will literally be full and overflowing, well before, like weeks before that they're running. So they're filling weeks in advance regularly. So that's something we are bearing witness to. And so I think the intersectional identities, with other marginalized identities, is obviously going to be more challenging and have more impact on individuals. And yet at the same time, I'd say our young Jews are impacted, our older Jews are impacted. I think that we're really seeing across the age span, and it's an issue that can continue, especially if you're not, if you're experiencing feelings and not getting support. I think this is something that we are noticing is still a need.
Yeah. And the only thing I would add to that, and I agree with everything Tara said, and is that we can really see that it kind of, every community has a different need, but a need. So whether someone is completely isolated from the Jewish community, and so then they come to us because this is like the only place they can talk to someone, or whether someone is living in a quite full community like New York or the Bay Area, but then there's also a lot more anti-Semitism in other ways that's showing up, like both sides of kind of where people are coming from, where they're living, and their own communities, they need different types of support, but everyone needs the support.
A question from the audience is, how do people go about actually finding the groups? And I'm curious too, like the flip side, like, are you seeking out, do you have kind of channels for seeking out people who might need this but don't know about it? Or like, yeah, how do you kind of find the people who need it most?
Yeah, most people are not aware that we exist, most of the Jewish community, although we have had our website up and running since January. You can find us at jcmhi.com. That's our acronym. And we have, like I said, 25 groups that run weekly. And we are, trying to get the word out more. I just shared with you today, Molly, that we're beginning a digital advertising campaign now, but it's really our first time doing that. But we know that there's still a need, and we have people who will come into our groups and ask why hadn't they heard of this for the past year and a half, and that they really needed it.
So please spread the word.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that I think, everybody here is definitely learning a lot and able to share with their communities. And so people can just go to the website and kind of find the groups available and join from there.
Yes, absolutely. You will need to register for the platform first, because we have each person gets individually welcomed in. We have some security. And then once you are in the platform, all the groups are free. You have access to them, and you also have access to resources that we've been developing. We have resources on traumatic invalidation, on collective grief. And I'm seeing a question here. We do have a support group for descendants of the Holocaust. So yes, we do have that specific affinity group. And funding, it looks like someone's asking about funding. We are also funded by UJA Federation of New York, and we're very grateful for that, and Jewish Federation of LA, and many other smaller foundations.
Thank you. I got another question. I'm not sure if you can comment on this or if this is something that you've seen come up, but somebody asked, are Jewish students having difficulty getting jobs? And that they've heard from people that people with master's degrees and very qualified people are struggling to find jobs right now. Have you heard anything to that?
We haven't really heard, at least I have not really heard of that in particular. We really aren't experts in that. Certainly anecdotally, we've heard Jewish people struggling in more academic settings is what we've heard. In graduate programs or undergraduate programs, we've heard of issues that have come up there that have been really challenging. Sasha, have you heard about people struggling to get jobs?
I have heard it a bit in our groups. That does come up, and maybe not even just about struggling to get jobs, but also we've had a few people talk about struggling to keep jobs or leaving jobs as a result, right, of anti-Semitism, and then feeling like they have to start over. Tara mentioned kind of the academic sphere. I think it's other places where we see it is the medical setting. It's definitely come up. I just had another one and it completely flew out of my head.
We run a group for Jews in the literary world. So actually we've definitely seen issues there. And also we've seen issues in the tech sector. So, I mean, I think not for profits, but mostly what at least I've seen and heard are people, like Sasha said, who are struggling maybe in their current job, trying to find a way to live in an environment that may feel that is not supportive of who they are.
I guess I can also share anecdotally. I feel like I've come across a lot of people who are leaving jobs in other industries and sectors wanting to come into the Jewish job world, Jewish nonprofits, both to be around people who they feel like understand what they're going through, and because similarly to you guys, they feel pulled to actually, contribute to their own community right now in whatever way they can.
Absolutely.
Somebody asked, how do you plan to take the results from your studies to extend to the wider community, including those beyond the Jewish community?
So we do, before the Jewish Community Mental Health Initiative was officially formed, there were a group of us that completed a study looking at the impact of campus anti-Semitism on the mental health of both undergrads and grads, and that study is now in peer review. We're hoping it will be published soon. And first and foremost, what we want is to be able to publish more academic data on our Jewish community, because that is what will affect more change and also understanding for our own community and for people outside of the Jewish community. So we know that it's very important to have data and research so that people can understand our experiences. And really, there have not been enough studies on understanding Jewish trauma. So this is something that we're trying to add to the literature. And of course, we are making recommendations. Actually, we're about to work on a paper that, in many ways has already been written, but really focus on recommendations from our experience of working with the Jewish community and running hundreds of support groups for over a year now. So we will be making recommendations to our own professional colleagues. We know that we need to train clinicians in understanding Jewish identity and the impact of anti-Semitism and mental health. It's not something that was well taught in grad programs across mental health fields. So that's an area we really want to contribute so that when Jewish individuals seek mental health support, they are working with someone who's knowledgeable and culturally sensitive.
There's a couple related questions about the actual format of the groups themselves that maybe you can just share a bit as far as like, how are they actually formatted? How long are they? Is it like, I'm trying to find,
Yeah, I think a
right, like,
summary,
is it like
it's
group
short or
therapy? Is it
yeah.
educational? Just a
I
little
can
bit more
tackle
detail.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all of our groups are formatted the same in that they're all an hour long. These are all support groups. They are not therapy groups. And that's part of what allows us to be able to serve the community across the country and other countries. And so they are all very much supportive in nature. Typically, the participants will come in and all check in and then may bring up a topic that they want to talk about or a theme for that day. And then occasionally there will be a psychoeducational component of like coping tools like I shared today in the slides, but really the primary focus is a support group for the people coming in.
Yeah, and the participants are really working to support each other, and our role is facilitation and the community. Often people come in and it's really the first time sometimes they hear someone articulate their experience, and it's very healing to feel less alone and to be able to put words to what you're feeling, and especially when you're in a community setting.
We have just a few more minutes left for our time today. I'm curious if you have any advice, or what would you say to somebody who maybe feels a little bit unsure of whether they belong in one of your groups, or whether, maybe just feel timid about the support group environment in general, and if you, what you would kind of offer them?
I think I would recommend giving it a try. And the good thing about our groups is it's very low barrier. You can just register, they're free. You can try out as many as you want, and there's no commitment. You don't need to go every week. You can come and go as you please. We did this purposely so that there would be low barrier and less burden on community so that they could use the support as needed. And if you try a group and it feels like that group isn't the best match for you, we have 24 others. So, feel free to explore. People do. We have people who will try one group and maybe they, make it their home for a period of time, but then something changes in their schedule. So they go to another group that week. So it's a very flexible and supportive process, I would say.
And really, yeah, the only thing I would add to that is it's really a space for you. I mean, our goal is truly to make everyone feel like they can have the safe space, a space where they can belong and feel heard, and where you can, you don't have to share much when you're starting, and you can kind of course, we want to hear from everyone, but it's okay to just see and kind of get a sense of what it's like. And then most people end up sharing and opening up because the group members all support each other so much, and it becomes this pretty instant just camaraderie in a sense in most of these groups. So I second Tara, and we hope that people just try it once and see if it's a good fit for you.
Yeah, I just anecdotally, I've been running my group for well over a year now, and it's honestly one of my favorite hours of the week. It's so inspiring to sit with community and see our community come together, our strengths, our capacity to, deal with the distress, and our compassion and kindness and incredible support for each other. So
Thank you both so much. I'm sorry, I know there were a few last minute questions streaming in. Unfortunately, we don't have time to get to, but anyone can feel free to reach out to community@myjewishlearning.com. And from there, we can, forward your questions on to the appropriate people. So thank you everybody for joining us tonight. And thank you, Tara and Sasha, so much for all your work.
Thank
thank
you.
you,
Thank you,
Molly.
Molly.
Good night.